Hi, I'm Kaytlyn,
And I'm Brianna.
and welcome to the Readers Clubhouse where we revisit our childhood favorite content. Brianna, boy, do I have a question for you this fine afternoon.
Uh-oh.
I already think I know the answer to this question,
Yeah.
although you could go rogue and answer it in a different way.
It's just like the cat question again.
Um, it's more like the fishing question where I thought you had. I thought for sure you didn't have a story, and then you were like,
yeah. That's
yes,
actually what I meant. I got the cat and the fish mixed up was the problem.
as we often do.
Yes.
If you were going to have a pet that was a fantasy or fictional creature, what would it be?
That's so difficult, Kaytlyn. Why'd you ask me that?
Because it's relevant. That's why.
Okay, the issue is most of the creatures I could think of, wouldn't say they'd be a pet per se.
Sure.
I kind of like for example, like dragons, how we get dragons that are both extremely sentient and like they are like people because they can talk and like all that kind of other stuff. And then there's ones that are kind of more animalistic, but are still intelligent and everything.
Yeah.
So like kind of depends, honestly. Oh, okay.
Let's some parameters, because I'm a person who hates wide open questions.
Thank you. I am too. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Parameters. They are non-violent, and it doesn't have to be just pet. Let's call it a companion. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a pet or it's a friend, whatever it is. Eventually we'll talk about books where the dragons are intelligent, telepathically connected to their writers. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about other so let's say a companion of some kind, but is a fantasy creature, not a humanoid in terms of like D&D races type. Yeah. You know, the Aarakocra, the elephant ones. But a fantasy creature.
Okay. Well, now that you say that, I think see where you're trying to direct me here, because my usual go-to is griffins.
Correct. Actually, it was that one or centaurs. Those are going to be one of
that actually, literally, so griffins and centaurs 100%, and you know why, because that's my handle a lot of stuff is centaurs, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then Sphinx is like right under that.
Yeah.
And then dragons and everything and stuff. And I'd have a wider list, but we're not going to talk about that this time. But after I thought about it, because you said pet, and I'm like...
Yeah, I shouldn't have said the word pet. That was a misnomer.
Yeah, especially because of some of the stuff that happens in this book.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about a certain character.
We will. Oh my gosh, wow. What a great transition, Brianna. Would you like to tell our listeners about the book we're going to be talking about?
I would love to, because this is one of my favorite duologies. Ooh, like, honestly, I really, really wish she would have written more in this setting. It's one of my favorites. Yeah. So, to get some of our, like, basically, like, specific information like we always do. One of the things I do want to specify, guys, we are taking a break from Redwall these next 2 episodes, possibly 3, depending on how our schedule goes and stuff. So, this is not about Redwall. This is about a different series, and I'm going to introduce it to you. Or duology, specifically. This isn't a series. So, first off, the book that we are talking about today is the Dark Lord of Derkholm. The Dark Lord of... What?
I just made a sound.
Oh, I see what you're trying to do. Aha. So, the Dark Lord of Derkholm was written by Diana Wynne Jones. And to some of you, this author's name is very familiar. For those of you that are like, it's on the tip of my tongue, I don't remember, what is it? She actually wrote Howl's Moving Castle. Which we're not going to talk about today. That's going to be a whole different episode at some point.
Yeah, it will.
But she is the author who wrote that and this. So if you actually have read Howl's Moving Castle, but have not read this, you'll get kind of a sense of her writing style, her humor, all those kinds of things with this book as well. And that's one of the things that I've always loved about her writing is there's just this like silliness, humor, but also like she does really well with the flaws of the character, which I'll talk about more in depth a little bit later. So, Diana Wynne Jones is the one that wrote it. It was released in 1998, so the end of the 90s. The genre is fantasy parody, and we'll get more into what the parody part means a little bit later after I do the overview and stuff. But, and then the age range, which is really, really funny. Me and Kaytlyn were talking about this before we started recording and everything. The age range is still middle grade. It is from 8 to 14 age range, which is really funny because the main protagonist for a big chunk of the book is a middle-aged father of 7. And but we also still get like some of the characters it's from the perspective of some of his kids and a couple of other characters. I actually think it's mostly from the perspective of his kids.
I think so. It's the 7 of them, but mainly
it's mainly the we'll get into this in a second, but it's mainly his one son Blade, who we'll talk more about later and stuff, and him. And then every once in a while we'll get, I think, a perspective from somebody else, but it's mostly between the two of them. And this is all in like third person perspective, so this isn't like internal dialogue or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So
can I just interject really quickly?
Yes, you can.
And talk about, I would never have done this, but how interesting it would have been to talk about family dynamics as the hook question.
Ooh, yeah.
I wouldn't have done that.
No, but actually, that we could talk more about that though in our after bit, in our part after the overview, because honestly, that's a really, really big part of the story and stuff.
Sorry, the hook question was going to be about our family dynamics.
Ooh, oh. No. Not this episode. Maybe not ever.
No.
Who knows?
No, we'll take that to therapy instead.
Yes, yeah. So yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we go into the overview?
I just want to say that I had a friend who said we need more music for our podcast.
Yes.
And I totally agree. However, I'm not a musician of any kind. Mm-hmm. I did, however, find some fun ambient medieval music to put as a backing for your monologue or your summary, rather. So,
perfect.
Would love, some feedback. Did that help? Did it make it more difficult to listen to? I don't know. However, we are working on some music, aka we have friends working on some music. So thank you to those friends. And one day we'll have more music. That's all, Brianna. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. For decades, this magical world has had to deal with a destructive tourist industry run by a man from a more modern world who somehow found a way to travel between dimensions. The people and lands this has affected are about to collapse under the strain of all of this. Kingdoms are ransacked, wizards are learning the bare minimum to get by, and the world itself seems to feel as if it's been abandoned by the gods. Just prior to the current tourist season, a group of leaders, led by Wizard Querida, gathers together to find a way to stop Mr. Chesney, the man in charge, and save their world. They consult a pair of oracles that point them in the direction of a wizard and his large family. This wizard is Wizard Dirk, an odd man with a penchant for magical genetics. Hence, more than half of his children are not fully human, but griffins. He is tasked with becoming this year's Dark Lord, and Dirk is not happy about this. He reluctantly agrees after he is backed into a corner, and then soon regrets this, and his whole life is turned upside down. As his family attempts to help set everything up, he starts to feel as if things are going well, and then the rug is pulled out from under him when he starts to feel as if his wife, Mara, is pulling away from him and doesn't care about him anymore. He is also attacked by a dragon and barely survives. In all of this, his children all set out to do their best in helping their father get everything finished and done. Many other mishaps occur during this time as the tours begin, and is not an easy time even after that. His 2 human children have to run their own group of tourists, and the rest of them attempt to keep things going, as well as making sure that their parents' marriage doesn't fall apart. Then things come to a head for poor Dirk. His son Blade is lost, and his griffin son Kit apparently was taken down during a mock battle that was going on. With this and the coldness of his wife he had been feeling, he locks himself up in their home and spirals into a depression that essentially halts tours, since his section was the end for the tours coming through. While that is going on, a number of other plans, like all of the women in the continent going on strike, and actress Wizard Querida, who organized this and a number of other things, sets out for Derkholm, where Dirk is holed up. Mr. Chesney arrives on the scene to see why everything has gone haywire, and with the help of a demon, a dragon, and a number of secrets coming to light, they are able to free the demon who Mr. Chesney had imprisoned to travel through dimensions. In the end, it is revealed that the demon was the Demon King's spouse. Blade and Kit were okay and stopped another plot that was connected to Mr. Chesney, and Mara had been under a spell that had caused her to be so cold to her husband. Their world is set free from Mr. Chesney, and they begin the slow process of righting this world once more.
Well done, Brianna.
Thank you.
It's good. Woo. You are so succinct.
I appreciate it.
Real good. If you, listener to this podcast and or reader of this book, think to yourself, that's a lot of things that don't seem to all fit together and seem a bit chaotic.
So true.
The answer is, you are correct. It is chaos, but it's the kind of chaos that works, in my opinion, and is just really fun, and it's sort of like going on a roller coaster. And that's it. Yeah. It's just a roller coaster ride from start to end. Which
actually is, honestly very much a Diana Wynne Jones book. Because, I haven't read everything of hers, but I actually think anything that I've read of hers has always been, chaotic. But it all ties together at the end, in a nice little package kind of a thing. And that was something that always, I think, is what drew me to her books, was that chaos.
Yeah.
And it's just wild to see it all come together.
The comedy. I mean, I know it's drier, a little bit drier just because it's a British comedy.
Yeah.
But there is something just really, something about the absolute insanity of it that I think is really funny. So,
absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about the world building. There's no songs or poetry really in this book. No. So we don't have to have that. We just have world building as a little bit. So crazy.
Yeah, and to start off with that, I am going to backtrack a little bit, sort of. That will make sense once I explain it. So this book actually came out of a parody book that she wrote with somebody 2 years prior. Or, no, she just wrote the book. This book came out of a parody book that she wrote that was called The Tough Guide to Fantasyland, which I hadn't actually read up to this point, and I didn't know until I was looking into stuff with this, that's what inspired this book and also its sequel. And I actually got a chance to find a copy of it, which was really cool. And I was starting to read it, and it was so funny because it is written like a guide that you're going on a tour, essentially, through this quote-unquote Fantasyland and being introduced to these different characters, etc. So
that's cool.
The world, it's really, really cool, actually. And the world that she created from that, parody, and those of you who know, parody is what's the right way to put it and stuff? A parody is using the elements that are usually taken more seriously and doing it in almost like a comedic or silly way and stuff. There's plenty of other parody stuff out there, but in this case, Diana Wynne Jones took the elements of a fantasy story and turned them on their head, or showed how exploitive they were depending on the scenario that was that was a part of it and stuff. And she just made fun of it a ton. And that was the whole point of the original book, The Tough Guide to Fantasy. But then it, definitely was emphasized more in this book, which actually was a lot, which was a lot of, people being exploited, overworked. Literally a big part of this world. And you get to actually see that it still kind of affects things later in the second book for a little bit. And this world is ravaged. Literally, there's kingdoms who can barely make it. And then there's other people who are profiting, highly on this. For example, one of the characters is, a priest for one of the gods from this world and stuff. And he talks about how his his group are making tons of money off of this for various reasons and everything. So it just was like fascinating how she showed just like the disproportionate like power balance and everything because of essentially a foreign body coming into this world and exploiting it to their benefit to fit a narrative that he wanted it to fit, which I'm like, wow, this sounds a little bit too much like real life, which is how those books, honestly, like a lot of, especially fantasy books, love to tell those kinds of stories and everything.
Yeah.
So that was something I really enjoyed about this. And then also learning about like how this was a spinoff essentially of a literal fictional guide to a fantasy world kind of a thing, which I loved.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
Man. It's definitely, it makes a bit more sense why she went so hard on the whole making fun of a lot of tropes, and especially the sort of almost your classic, like you meet in a tavern and your adventuring party goes out and there's always, you know, that kind of style, almost Lord of the Rings style, you know, group dynamic, which is what the tourist groups are. So, like, to set up the world, right? You have the world. I don't remember. Do we ever get the actual name of their world?
If it was mentioned, I don't remember it. It was definitely not like more than probably once. I don't remember. We could just call it Fantasy World.
Fantasy World. So you have Fantasy World and you have Modern World. And they're two sort of adjacent dimensions, I guess. We're not going to get into the whole... like...
she loves to play with dimensions in her books. So
she does,
confusing, yeah.
And she doesn't go into the actual, like, theoretical physics of it all. She just goes into the whole... It's a thing. So you have the two worlds, modern world and the fantasy world. In the modern world, this guy named Mr. Chesney, he trapped / contracted / enslaved a demon that is able to go between the dimensions. And he decided in order to, as he's doing that, one of the things he's going to do is set up essentially a theme park. However, the theme park is the whole entire world of this fantasy world.
Yeah.
And... so, world building wise, you have these two sort of major worlds. You don't really ever go to the modern world. I think you get a glimpse of it maybe at one point, but it's basically in fantasy world. The fantasy world has different kingdoms, nations, empires, different locations, and the every year they get the pilgrim tours. So people from the real world, not the real world, sorry, the modern world. Come in through this portal, and then they get a tour guide who brings them on a specifically planned out tour. I think it's like several months or weeks or something like that.
It's weeks, because months is they have to like they get through a lot of tours and everything. So the tours, like the event of the tours last month, but the actual tour itself I think is only supposed to be a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Okay. So then tourists are coming through, they're doing different things. One of the things they have to do is hire armies. They have to, it's literally, it's take a theme park and all the things you have to hire and all the things you have to think about. Or I guess a really good thing, it's like a reenactment scenario. If you're going to a reenactment of any kind, you have to think about all these details. And that is the overarching story of this book. And only this book. We get to explore a little bit more about the world in the second book, but
that's more of a recovery state of what happened previously and less of you seeing the atrocities that occurred because of Mr. Chesney kind of a thing and stuff.
So that's the big overarching. There's a university, and the university trains wizards. However, like Brianna said in her summary, they're getting the basic training and then having to go out into the world as tour guides, and then lead the tours. It's just everybody in this world is being exploited, and some of them are leaning into the exploitation, and some of them want to rebel but don't know how. But Wizard, okay, Brianna and I disagree on how to say her name.
Querda?
How do you say it?
Querda.
Is that how the audiobook said it?
I feel like that is. Because I thought it started with a K first, but it actually starts with a Q, because kind of depending on how you say it, it does sound like when you're saying a Q, it's a K.
Yeah.
Etc. So it's a little confusing.
Because in Spanish, the QUE is K.
That's
so I
true.
always called her Querida.
Querida. That actually... either way...
It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter to me slightly. But
yes, yeah.
She's the principal, headmistress?
No, she's the chancellor.
The chancellor of the university.
Yeah.
In fantasy world.
Which also makes her, like, one of the most powerful wizards.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Super powerful, super old, super wise. And she has devised over the course of probably many years. We don't actually get...
we don't get an insight into her planning process now, yeah.
But it has definitely been a while. Because she has set this whole plan up of how to get rid of Mr. Chesney. Now, the thing about brilliant people is even if they are working with other people, they don't share their plans. And so we as the reader actually don't get even the revelation of how much her influence has spread and how many people she has influenced. And it's really fun actually going through the story, and as the main characters interact with these different situations that Querida, whatever her name is. Querida.
Just say it the way that it makes you feel good, Kaytlyn.
Querida. Yeah. I've now lost it. That word has become nothing to me. The wizard chancellor of the university. I've even lost my train of thought, man. Wow, that just really got me.
For a picture of this woman, she is like an old, angry woman.
That's her whole.
She's really intelligent, really powerful, but old and angry.
Yeah,
and that's her whole vibe.
She's seen the exploitation of the world that she lives in for.
But
however many years Chesney's done it.
I will say, do we want to talk about this now? I loved her at first, and then
should we talk? Or should we get into that in the characters section?
Maybe we should do that in the characters, but we don't want to spend too much time because, there's a lot of stuff with the characters. There's a lot of characters.
There are a lot of characters,
but there's not as many characters as there are in our Brian Jakes books. But
true,
there's a lot of characters that affect a lot of things.
Yeah, it's the difference between Brian Jakes is that he's got a lot of characters, but only a few of them are super important to the story
for longer periods of time. Too.
For longer periods of time, where Diana Wynne Jones has less characters, but they're all in some ways really important to the story.
Yes,
or even not necessarily important to the main story, but to the peripheral storylines or the things that we're not seeing that end up affecting the main story. It's crazy to me. Anyway, so that's the world building. However, part of the world building is also that there is this family.
Yes.
It's Dirk and Mara, husband and wife, wizards both, fantastic, brilliant people. Now, Dirk is a geneticist, a fantasy geneticist, and he experiments with the genetics of him and his wife, and they have 2 human children and 5 winged griffin children. Yeah. And at the end of the book, they end up having 2 angelic-ish children. Yeah. They're human and have wings.
That's basically...
That's the whole thing.
That's what their thing is.
They're humans with wings. Super interesting characters. Dirk is... And I've only read Howl's Moving Castle and this duology, so I don't know. But what I do know about Diana Wynne Jones, based on these 3 books that I've read, is she loves a dramatic man.
Oh, yeah. I've read a couple of other stuff, and then we may be able to talk about them at some point in different episodes, but Christopher Chrestomanci, if anybody's read that series, she loves a dramatic man. So much, yeah.
And not even just, your typical drama, but, a drama queen. If you've seen or read Howl's Moving Castle, and particularly the visual scene we get in the film of him just turning green and oozing slime, it is such a drama that it is so annoying.
Yeah,
Dirk is that basically, except
I will say he's a father. He's more of an introvert, if that makes any sense. Of he just doesn't like to deal with people because people have been mean to him all his life.
It's true, but he is also super dramatic.
He is. That's so true. Yeah,
he's an introvert. He just wants to do his little experiments and have fun. And he's got flying pigs and horses that can talk and flying horses and all these things, and he just wants to experiment genetically with creatures.
I think
what are the ethics of that, Brianna? Should we talk about the ethics of experimenting on creatures?
We'll talk about that in a second. One of the things I do want to say before we move on from like that little bit we're talking about is the difference between, I feel like, the dramatics of Dirk and the dramatics of Howl is that like Dirk is more selfless than Howl is.
Howl's a whiny baby.
Howl's a whiny baby, and like he does care about people, etc. But in the end, like his general like go-to thing is to take care of himself and everything.
Yes. But we're not talking about that book, Brianna.
No, we're not. But Dirk's whole vibe is he loves his family, he loves his job, essentially, and he just wants people to leave him alone to take care of both of those things. Like,
it's more that's his hobby than it is his job.
But he does make money off of it. But most of the money comes from, I think, his wife's profession and everything. So
she's the breadwinner. He just gets to live off of,
and she loves it. Like,
she loves it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
She's not opposed to him experimenting on their genetics to make children that she doesn't have to physically bear. She's like, sure, these are my kids.
Yeah.
It's like, interesting. I guess the world building is kind of just that. It's a long journey through the world that they live in, and to actually go through each of the places, I feel would be just an entire episode in and of itself.
The thing with this series is the places themselves aren't characters. It's the characters that make up the place. Right. Or like the situation that's going on. Yeah. But like with Redwall, it's more of like those places have a character, especially because we get to see some of those places over and over again through the series. This one, not so much. So it's almost like the world building is really great, but it's like mostly hinged on the characters in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because even when they're at like the camp to set up, where the big combat happens, it's not about the camp, it's about the situations that are happening at the camp. So cool. We should probably get into the characters because there are loads of them, and we will talk about like favorite and least favorite. But I think we should just do a really short
breakdown of each of them, essentially.
Yeah. And just not all of them. Let me rephrase.
There's some that we can definitely skip over.
Yeah. But I think we should definitely talk about the Derkholm family. And then sort of some of the main. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at our list, and there are actually just so many. Okay, let's start. Let's start with the Derkholm family. We've already talked about Dirk and Mara a bit. Yeah. They have 5 kids. They have 2 human kids. Yeah. One named Shona, I believe is how you say that.
Yes,
And I believe she's the eldest, isn't she?
Yeah, she's the oldest. Her and Kit, we'll talk about who all of these are and everything. Her and Kit are the closest in age. Okay. And then Colette and Blade are the next closest in age, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay, so I guess I'll go by species rather than age. Okay. It's just such a weird thing to say. So it's Shona is a human. Yes. And Blade is also a human. Yeah. Now, then they have 5 Griffin children. Yeah. And in the story, Dirk takes some of the cells, some of the genetics, some of the cells, I guess, of him and his wife, and then combine them with the cells, I believe, of certain, like, felines, birds, and, this was lion and bird, I think. Maybe it was just the 2 things.
I'm pretty sure Elda, I'm pretty sure Elda has, like, literally a house cat was her thing, if I remember correctly. So, like, and I think
it's felines is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Not actual large cats. It's felines, and some of the cells are from different.
Yeah, like he did. If I'm remembering correctly, he took different felines for the whoever it was, essentially, and stuff. And also, maybe possibly different bird types, but I don't want to say that one for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely different felines, but I don't remember about the birds. Yeah, because the feline part was part of the story and part of the discussion. Yeah. So then you have Kit, who's the oldest Griffin. And then you have Colette, who is the next eldest, I believe.
Yeah. And then Lyta, Dawn, and Elda,
Dawn.
I think.
I don't think Dawn's on our list, Brianna.
Did we forget Dawn?
I think we forgot Dawn.
Which, I mean,
yeah. Sorry, kid. He's not.
Yeah. He's not. Let's go through each of the siblings.
Yeah.
And stuff, and then we'll get to why Dawn was, I think, forgotten in this case.
Oh, buddy, I feel bad. He's a middle child.
Some good. He is a middle child. He had some good moments with them, but he didn't really do anything himself and stuff.
Where everybody else kind of did.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Poor Dawn.
I feel so bad for him.
But I mean, like, he has a bit of a moment in the second book, but like, it's not anything big. It's not like he did something.
No.
But yeah.
Bud. Okay.
Yeah.
So Shona is a bard, or becomes a bard. Basically, that's what she wants to. She wants to. Yeah. She wants to go to Bard College. She wants to become a bard. However, is it Dirk that doesn't want her to be a bard, or is it Mara?
No, that's not at the thing, Kaytlyn. Here's what happens.
Why don't you take the lead on the characters and tell me about them?
So, Shona wants to be a bard. The family is completely okay with this. Wants this for her. Shona is like the type A older sister vibes. She loves to boss everybody around, tell them what to do, etc. kind of a thing. She is helping her parents a lot, so it's like not unfounded, some of that bossiness of like, we need to get stuff done. But then sometimes she is a little bit overboard with it and stuff. So that's Shona. Shona wants to go to bard school. She's all set to go to bard school. But the bard school is revolting against the whole tours and refuses to send bards out to do it. But Shona loves her family, and her dad has gotten roped into being the Dark Lord. So she gets a letter after a certain point saying, like, sorry, we're going to have to ixnay you from the college because you're supporting the thing that we're revolting against and stuff. Which is kind of funny because I'm like, if they just waited a little bit longer, things would have figured itself out, and that wouldn't have all happened, but whatever. So Shona's devastated after a certain point in the book because, like, her dream is crushed and everything. It's a really big deal, etc. So, like, that's her whole thing.
Like father, like daughter, sinks into depression.
Oh, yeah. She's beautiful like her mother and dramatic like her dad. So, like, that's a combo right there.
It really is. Man.
It is, yeah. And then there's Blade. I'm going to go also through, like, the human children first. All right. And then there's Blade, who, in the scheme of the human children, is, like, a little bit younger than Shona. Mm-hmm. So Blade really wants to learn to be a wizard. Dirk hates the wizard university.
Yeah, he does.
Because he loved to question things and experiment, and at the point when he was going to school, they were in the throes of, like, doing what they were currently already doing, which is just trying to produce wizards that could do the minimum and everything. And he wanted to experiment, hence, like, the genetics, all that kind of stuff. He also just, like, had a lot of things happen to him while he was there. So he doesn't like the wizard university. And Blade's like, I really want to learn to be a wizard. So actually our first meeting with Dirk and Blade is in a moment where we actually are coming... Oh, I forgot. One of the other main characters we get the perspective from is Querda. That's what it was. And then we first meet Dirk and Blade when Dirk took Blade to these, like, oracles that could, like, tell him who his wizard teacher is going to be, because you can also do, like, apprentice teacher kind of a thing. And Blade, like, they get a super cryptic message from these oracles, of course, because they're oracles. And he's just like, what the heck did that mean, etc., and that kind of stuff. So Blade is a, like, 14-year-old boy. Like, keep that in mind, guys, with Blade. He's like a 14-year-old boy, and he's still trying to figure out stuff about himself, and he is, like, he kind of is struggling with some things because of it. He's in this transition from being a kid to an adult, essentially, and everything. And that really comes through with his story. He knows enough about wizard stuff that he gets recruited into being one of the wizards for a tour group, because every tour group needs a wizard. Yeah. And the whole story is about him kind of essentially growing up through this. One of my favorite parts of the book is a moment showing that very clearly, and it's during the tour aspect, which is like the last half of the book. Him and Shona are on the tour, and they're at a certain point, and something happens, And I feel like he did something, and he's like, oh no, Shona's going to get back at me. And at this point, Shona's gone through some things and stuff that we didn't even touch on, actually. Like, some major things happened to her. And that were not just the fact that she lost her, like, ability to go bard school. There was a couple of other things that I'm not going to talk about with this. But she had kind of essentially, it showed in this moment that she was adult enough. She wasn't going to try to get back at him with this. She had other things going on, but he's still so caught up in being a kid and that his sibling is going to still do this thing and everything like that. So that's a part of who Blade is. Then we have, oh, sorry. No, what were you going to say about Blade?
He is still, it's that really awkward time of being young and yet also still being a kid, and especially in a fantasy world, like, in our day and age, in our modern times, 14's not an adult. It is still a child. And
no,
it's crazy to me sometimes to think about the fact that in some eras of our history in the world, and actually probably still some places still today, the age of 14, you are nearly an adult. Like, essentially 16 years old, you've reached adulthood and are able to be like a functioning member of society at that age. But, like, Blade is on his way there, where he's nearly at the adult age, but still that really awkward time of not quite like he's like reaching the end of fantasy puberty and struggling to understand his place in the world, especially in a world that is so dark, and a world that he's trying to both follow and follow the rules of, while also being like, this doesn't make any sense, and things are happening that I don't understand, but I also have a job to do, and I need to get this group of people from point A to point B in this time, but things just keep going wrong. And honestly, even though he is a bit of a whiny baby, and this is why Brianna put him higher than me in our ranking of the characters, I don't know, I have a note in here to yell at you for something, and I can't remember why.
Yell at B. I had put him a little bit lower, I think, and then I realized where you were coming from.
Okay, so I was defending him.
I don't see our normal.
And you were like, he's a whiny baby, and I was like, hold on a minute, he's a kid trying to find his place in a world that is horrible and devastating, and he's honestly trying to carry his whole family. Anyway, I could go off on a whole thing about that, but I'm not going to.
Yeah. No, and the thing is, like, his way about going about trying to do the whole thing with his family is very different from what Shona is trying to do and stuff, because he still wants to be a kid and everything. So, like, it's this fight kind of between that. So
a kid who's grown up too fast, who doesn't want to be an adult, is being forced to be an adult, essentially.
But he also does want to be an adult in some aspects too, because he wants to be a wizard. Like, that's, like, his goal. So
it's very much
this tug
where
of war.
He's with his... It's very much of like, he's his father's son in his desire to do the things he wants to do, but also have the freedom aspect of it, of, I still want to play and experiment. You know, with Dirk specifically, it's, I want to play and experiment. I don't want to have all these responsibilities. Yeah. Where for Blade, it's, I want to have fun and be a wizard and learn how to be a wizard, but I'm also... sort of responsible for carrying this entire pilgrimage on my back, which no 14-year-old should have to do.
No, and the funny thing is like, it's not even funny, but like the reality of it is like the wizards, even if they're, I don't even actually. It doesn't matter how old the wizard is. They have to dress up like an old man wizard. So he is a 14-year-old that is made to look like an old man.
Classic.
And so, like, all of the people in this group are like, you're in charge. You should know what you're doing. And treating him like an adult, like a more of an adult than he actually is. And stuff.
All right.
So
anyway,
that's a big part of Blade's
story.
Move
on, because we're already taking a freaking long time talking about these things.
Yes, so Kit. Kit is the second oldest technically in all of the kids. He was, him and Shona were really close when they were little, but they both are extremely stubborn. And literally at one point in the book, they're like, the fights between Kit and Shona are epic and everything and stuff, because Kit is extremely stubborn. He is extremely big. and also magically strong as well and stuff. So he, Kit has essentially a chip on his shoulder in a lot of ways because he doesn't know where to channel his like anger. He's the kind of image that I get with Kit. He's like one of those big kids who grew up too fast physically in a lot of ways and doesn't know how to direct his energy or any of that kind of stuff, and thinks that he's going to get something out of like being kind of the bigger, tougher one essentially and stuff, because which actually bites him in the butt later and everything, because he thinks that he wants to be like, sorry to put this. So one of the things we talked about earlier is there's like this mock battle setup, and one of the things that the way that they go about fulfilling the mock battle for the evil the Dark Lord's army is they recruit criminals from the modern world and transport over to the fantasy world and stuff. And so there's some stuff that happens during all those. They're supposed to be under a spell that keeps them docile, but that kind of doesn't last super long and everything. Again, not going to go so deeper into that. But Kit ends up running that whole section for a while. And Kit is like, I want to say Kit in the scheme of like age is like 17. So that's like, he's maybe a year younger than Mara, or not Mara, year younger than Shona, or right around her age, so 17, 18 and stuff. And he has this concept that he can handle whatever thing is thrown at him. He's bigger and stronger than everybody. And he also thinks that he can handle things like war. And despite the fact this is all supposed to be quote unquote fake, some very real things happen during those things. And he comes to a head at some point when he almost is killed by some of these like criminal dudes and stuff, and like essentially reality kind of hits him over the head, and he's put in this position of vulnerability that he wasn't expecting, and that really gets him, and that actually really sets him up for being a stronger character towards the end and stuff, which is one of the reasons why I really like Kit. Like honestly, I also wanted to smack him over the head with a pan essentially at multiple times during this, like his interactions with things, because he just also is very much like that's part of the reason why him and Shona, I think, fight so much, is because they just both want to be in charge of stuff, but have two very different ways about going about it and stuff. So, like, that's a big part of, like, Kit's whole character.
It's really interesting family dynamics-wise, because it's almost like they're both the oldest sibling, and they're fighting over oldest sibling vibes.
They're both very close in age, but they're also, like, there's the added thing of them both not being like human. One of them's a human, one of them's a griffin. But then there's also the aspect of like he's a boy, she's a girl. They have different like skills that they're both really good at, different things that they like are bad at, and all that kind of stuff. So like that, like there's so many different dynamics, but they're both so similar at the same time and stuff, which is very interesting. So moving on, then there's Colette, who is the artistic one of the family in her way. One of the plot points that happens is they're supposed to be, the Dark Lord's group is supposed to be in charge of like setting up basically like a treasure hunt, and they're supposed to be these like really beautiful treasures that they find, and they're supposed to come up with the treasures. Well, she's the one that comes up with the treasures that they find, and there's these beautiful things, and she loves to do art and everything, and she's very extremely intelligent. And one of the problems, I'm going to tap on this here and everything. So she's the one that kind of is like, ends up being sort of a mix of like a messenger as certain things happen. So she gets thrown out to a bunch of different places. Her and then their sister Lydia, who ends up doing that. I'll get to that in a second. Lyda end up having to do that too later. I'll get to her in a second. But Colette is kind of like, the way I want to describe her is like an aloof artist, because when she gets kind of caught up in her projects and stuff, she's just like kind of like, I'm not paying attention to anybody else kind of a thing. And I think her and Blade are the closest in age and stuff. I have to go back though and everything. It's been a while. But so her whole thing, at one point she meets Querda, and the thing that kind of, I really like Querda up to a certain point, and it was this part. And it was because she started to think of Colette as a object and not an actual sentient being, and wanted to own her essentially and stuff. And I'm like, at first I would be like, all right, I could see maybe why you would think this. You've never run into a griffin before. You don't actually know what they're like, etc. kind of a thing and stuff. But it's still, even after that, she really wanted to possess her. There was a couple of times where Colette made a comment about, like, Mom said we had to do it this way because you would try to trap me here if we didn't and everything. So, like, even Mara was very aware of, like, Querda and, like, her kind of thing sometimes and stuff. So that was something that Colette had to deal with. And then there is, I'm going to talk about Dawn now. Dawn is the only other boy Griffin, and he's kind of just, like, he's 100% middle child syndrome and everything. He is kind of just like, what did I do kind of thing and stuff. And he doesn't do anything really big during the story. He just kind of helps everybody else out as stuff goes on and everything. But, like, I mean, do you have anything to add to Dawn at all?
I just feel so bad because I actually don't remember anything about him. Brianna. I don't remember. I remember all these things about all the other Griffins, including and all the other children. But I don't remember what he contributed to the story.
He just was like a backup essentially and stuff. I feel like there was something that maybe stuck out, but I don't remember the whole thing. So sorry, Dawn. You were like, he very much was like teenage boy vibes as a Griffin. Like, he was like, honestly, if he'd gotten more screen time, I feel like his journey would have been a little bit similar to Blade's in some way, possibly, but he's not much of a wizard in his case and stuff, so it may not exactly have been the same thing. But yeah, so Dawn doesn't have a lot,
what I remember about Dawn is I liked him more than I liked Kit. And that's all that I remember. So.
Okay. I could see why you feel that way. It's
because Kit really irritated me up until he had his moment of growth, and then I liked him. But up until that point, I was like, it's the annoying teenager. Blade was a bit more of the anxious.
He was the annoying. Yes, he was an annoying, angry teenager, which made it really hard to be sympathetic some of the time.
Especially because the way that he would react to people would be really rude. I also just feel bad we're talking about Kit again. We're talking about Dawn. Sorry, Dawn.
Oh, I'm not the one that brought him up. So
I like you more than I like Kit. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So there's Dawn. Then there's Lyda, who is my personal favorite out of the Griffins because she's just very sweet. She's the cook in the family. She makes the food. She's like essentially a genius in the kitchen and stuff. But she also is a bit of a chubby.
She's a wizard in the kitchen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so she's a wizard in the kitchen. And she's a little bit of a chubby Griffin because she likes to eat also and everything like that. And she's just very sweet. She kind of has a similar bent to Shona a little bit in, like, she's there to take care of her family. Like, when Dirk... Oh, I remember. I mentioned in the overview that Dirk was charred by a dragon at one point, and we're not going to go super deep into what was going on with that. But he was out of commission for a while, so the kids literally took up the slack and, like, figured stuff out. And she was the one that took care of him during that whole time and made sure that he was, like, healing and all that kind of stuff because things were going on. And so she was the one that was doing all of that. But the thing that's really cool is later on, she kind of gets forced to, like, leave home and, like, do some other stuff because, like, we need you to go do this. And she's like, but I get tired out when I'm flying. And Dirk literally tells her, like, girl, I made you so that you could do long distance flying, not fast. So take your time. And then she disappears for a while at one point after she does something or whatever. And she, like, goes on her own journey that we know nothing about. And some things kind of come to a head. And then she, like, comes back and she's, like, more confident in herself and, like, is more secure in, like, her ability to fly and all that kind of stuff. And so that was one of the reasons why I really liked Lyda.
I think that her particular story in this I thought was really cool, especially with again, they're all under 18 except for maybe Shona and then maybe Kit, but it's just really funny because she really does come into her own as this, like, little middle school age Griffin. And of course Griffins age differently than humans do. So even though you know, they're all fully grown creatures except for the last one, I believe. Lyda does definitely come into her own as a long distance flyer rather than a speed, and she's just really cool. She's the character I think. I think of all the Griffins, I think she was my most favorite.
Yeah,
as well,
for sure. And then finally, we have Elda, and I have a soft spot in my heart for Elda, less so because of the story. That's so true. But more so with the second book because she's one of our main people in the second book. And I love her. She's very like rambunctious. She's still a child. Like that's 100%. One of my favorite parts later in the book, they visit their mom who's running her own little thing with the tour, and she's been with her mom the whole time. And her mom at one point is like yelling at her to brush her like tail or something like that. I forget what it was. It was very much like child, like girl child who like has a crazy mop of hair kind of thing going on. And I was like, this is like so like little girl coded, who's also like very active, exuberant and stuff. So I appreciated the portrayal of Elda, but Elda was very much, I feel like, the empath in a lot of ways during the whole with the whole family, because when things were really, really getting bad with Mara and Dirk, Elda was like, what's going on? She kept trying to push things and was like, you got to check on Dad. Dad's sad. Like she was very much like empathetic to like everything that was going on and wanted things to get fixed and stuff. And at the same time, it's just this little kid and everything. So that was one of the things I really liked with Elda. So that is the Derkholm family. That's all of them. Mara, we didn't talk a little bit too in depth of Mara, just to give people some like perspective on her. She's also a very powerful wizard. Her whole thing that she does, she makes miniature worlds, essentially, almost like a snow globe size and stuff. So like that's her thing. They sell really well and all that kind of stuff. So that's how her and Dirk, I feel like, make most of their money. And she's a very beautiful woman. She loves her family and her husband. She loves to take care of everybody. But like we find out the reason why her and Dirk were having such a hard time, and I mentioned this briefly in the overview, is because she was under spell, and it was because Querida put the spell on her because she knew if she didn't try to like do some of the stuff, like her love for Dirk would get in the way of the plan they were trying to enact and stuff. And so she was pissed and was not happy when she figured that out and was able to actually get out from under the spell and everything. So that's a little bit with Mara and stuff. So those are the main family. There's a lot of other characters that are not a part of the family that are like important to the story. Which ones do you think, Kaytlyn, maybe we should tap into a little bit here and stuff?
Honestly, I actually don't think we need to talk about, because I think Scales is maybe the last one we need to talk about, and then we can talk about
Scales and Mr. Chesney.
and then Mr. Chesney. I think those are the last two. So let's talk about Mr. Chesney.
Okay. So Mr. Chesney is the villain of the story. You do not see him much. You see him twice during the book, and it was literally towards the beginning-ish and then the ending, because he does this thing at the beginning of the tours where he checks in, and then he gets kind of pulled back in when things get held up at towards the end of the book and stuff, and when they confront him. So I feel like one of the reasons that Mr. Chesney made such a good villain, because that was something I feel like we both agreed on when we were doing this, is like, it's not because he was so like heavily involved with the story, it was how much we saw his essentially like how far his evil reached kind of a thing in this world without him even being there. And it was mostly because he had the demon on his side, but also he essentially had a couple of specific hostages that kept him kind of more in balance, like in a power imbalance with certain other groups in the world. And so because he made a few of the right moves and had the right kind of power, he was able to control his whole world and stuff. And he wasn't like overly charismatic, or like I wasn't rooting for him at any point like some other villains you get kind of like maybe sucked into that stuff. He just was evil. Yeah, he was a bad dude. Literally, one of his other stuff is his daughter and stepson, I think, is what he is on the tour that Shona and Blade are running. And and they are told to kill his stepson and stuff, and that's because he set that up and everything. Unluckily for him, his daughter actually does care about her stepbrother and everything, so she was like, didn't want that to happen, and also she ends up running off with a dude from this world anyway at the end.
And doesn't
so Mr. Chesney,
the stepson, fall in love with Shona?
Oh yeah, Shona and the stepson, whose name I can't remember now. I feel like it started with a J.
I can't remember.
They get together at the end and everything. They end up having a baby, or not? They end up having a couple of kids. You see it. You don't get to see them, but you hear about them in the second book and stuff.
Is it Jeffrey?
That sounds. I almost wanted to say John, I think but I think it was Jeffrey. Because
I'm looking at our list and I'm like, Jeffrey is the only. Suki is the daughter.
Is the and then so Jeffrey probably because Jeffrey was so low on our list because
he just didn't do much. He was just
there. He was shown as arm candy at the end.
Literally it. He was just arm candy. And Suki definitely tried to flirt a bit with, everyone. Blade specifically, but kind of she was there to have a good time, and then she did the whole "but Daddy, I love him" sort of thing, but in a better way almost, because she's like, "Oh, but Daddy, you're evil, and so I'm gonna rebel against you. Instead, I'm just gonna fall in love with." Didn't she fall in love with Revel? What's his name?
Yeah, he was essentially the Prince of Thieves. So like he was rich and in charge of the rogues and everything of the world.
Gonna fall in love with someone, Why not the cool one? Yeah. So that's Chesney, and then
Scales.
He ends up. Does he end up dying at the end?
I'm pretty sure he does. I think the demons, because there's a demon that helps them stop Mr. Chesney, though he kind of manipulates everything to come to that end anyway. And it's because Mr. Chesney actually has a spouse trapped, which is the demon that gives Mr. Chesney the power that he has. So that is he does die, I'm pretty sure, because of that.
Because retribution. I had a friend a couple weekends ago. We were talking about books and things that we don't like in books, and one of the things that she was talking about is when there's not a good ending for characters. So I actually thought for this, with Mr. Chesney especially, that there was a good ending for him. There's justice for, well, maybe not justice, but there's vengeance for the horrible things that he did to this world. And granted, they're gonna have to take time to rebuild and recuperate, which we do get a little bit about in book 2. But I think ending wise, I was like, okay, this is a good ending for a villain who did an unrepentant villain. Because if it's a villain that's like, oh, I realize the error of my ways and I want to help rebuild, that's one thing. But if it's just you did all of these things and you're still like, well, no, I'm still going to be terrible, then I don't necessarily feel too sad when you get the consequences of your actions. So, now, the other major character that is really only major for such a minor part of the book, which is crazy to me because of how important world-wise he is. So you talked about Dirk getting accidentally burnt by a dragon.
Well, it was
accidental.
Sort of accidental. Not really. When he first burned him, it wasn't accidental. And then Mara put him in his place. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what was going on.
I thought the initial burning was accidental because he was old and confused.
No.
And
I mean, yeah, but he burnt him because he thought that he was lying to him, is what it was.
I don't know. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember that, but maybe it's just because I like Scales too much. But Scales ends up, like, he's awakened, he's confused, he, like you said, he thinks...
He comes to pledge himself to the
Dark Lord. The Dark Lord is like, I don't really want that. Mostly because the Dark Lord is dark. Yeah. And he's like, I don't want to be here at all right now.
Because he's not an actual Dark Lord.
He's like, I just want to leave. Thanks. I just want to sit with my pretty horses and my experiments and not have to do any of this. Yep. But over time, like, Scales ends up being actually helpful and does a lot of, like, actually useful things for kind of the end game. And then at the end, they're talking about how Blade needs a teacher for his magic, and who's it going to be? And they get a word called Deucalion, I think was the name, was the phrase that he got, and they're like, well, what the heck? Who's Deucalion? Yeah. And then Scales is like, ho, that was me. I'm the king of dragons, and also the greatest wizard, and blah, 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 blah. And they're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So that ends up happening that Kit and Blade, because of their experiences, end up becoming Scales apprentices, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. It is. Honestly, he was the perfect
mentor
teacher, especially for Kit. Because Kit, again, has a chip on his shoulder, is big, all that kind of stuff.
Scales is bigger.
Scales is literally a giant dragon.
And there's a bit of the, you can't, I will check your rage because you can't, what are you going to do to me? You're a tiny little baby, and I'm a giant, ancient dragon lord.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
So, go Scales. Alright,
he literally, I think, calls Kit something.
It's some sort of offensive term for, like, child.
Derogatory. Yeah.
Not offensive term for child, but he basically, he insults him by just calling him tiny. Is the...
Yes, yeah.
I don't remember the exact insult that he makes, although I could probably look it up.
Yeah.
But he does that. He says, you're a puny little squawk. Shall we move on to the nostalgia rating? Okay.
Yes.
Brianna, what do you give this book?
I give it a 5 out of 5, honestly. That it's... as a rereading, this funny thing is, I read this after the sequel and stuff, because that happened to me a couple of times growing up with certain things. I read, and we'll talk about this next time, but I read Year of the Griffin first, and then read this at some point and everything. But Year of the Griffin always was, like, my go-to. Love that one. But doing a reread of this, I loved it. I loved the dynamics between the family, and one of the things I really loved that I kind of ended up thinking about after reading The Year of the Griffin again was how well Diana Wynne Jones does character flaws mixed in with the character, and that yes, it actually causes problems for them sometimes, but ends up in some ways being a bit of a strength as well. And even some of their strengths become a flaw at certain points for certain characters and stuff. And that, I feel like, is a big thing with a lot of her stories. Yeah. And so that's something that I really loved about this. I feel like this book was such a good like representation of a family who's like loves each other a lot, but is definitely not always functional and stuff. But they would go to bat for each other. It's actually, this is a weird direction to take this a little bit, but some of our listeners may have like watched Bob's Burgers and stuff. I don't like adult cartoons 90% of the time. And the reason why Bob's Burgers I was always okay with was because despite the fact that sometimes they get really annoyed with each other and like dislike certain aspects of each other, they go to bat for each other and love each other and don't do things purposely to actually hurt each other. Unlike other adult medias with some of the families in it and stuff who do that stuff for like laughs a lot of the time and everything, in Bob's Burgers, the Belcher family always like goes to bat for each other and stuff, even when they know each other. And that's kind of in a similar vein with the Derkholm family and stuff. They sometimes don't like each other and the things they're doing, but they will always go to bat for each other and stuff. And that was one of my biggest things that I loved about this and why it's such a high rating. Because I always love stories where like you have a big family who loves each other. But is a little bit complicated and stuff. It's the same thing when I'm reading something with a found family. Yeah. I still love that stuff. So yeah, that's why it's one of my favorite. That's why I give it such a high nostalgia rating. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's probably still a 3. I don't think I've gone higher than a 3.5 in, I think it's our 5th episode or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's not, it is because I enjoyed reading it, and it was really fun to get back into this world and to be reminded of just how silly everything is. And what I love about this is that you can tell the characters are taking things seriously, but you can tell that Diana Wynne Jones isn't. And I like the dichotomy of that because it's like, obviously this is really intense and serious, and there's some really serious things like the exploitation of the planet, and that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that people are upset about it and they have to deal with it, and there's justice and but at the same time you can tell that Diana Wynne Jones is like another trope. Another trope.
Yep.
And it's funny to me. However, I think I also read Year of the Griffin before Dark Lord of Derkholm, and I think that's your fault because I probably read it after you
did.
That
probably was.
And it was, like, again, really funny, really good. I think that for me, there were some interesting things about the family dynamics that I totally agree with you that I like the reality of it. And obviously it's not entirely real. There's 5 griffins. Like, nobody has 5 griffin children.
Yes, yeah.
But personality-wise, the way that they interacted. And even, I agree with you, I'm not usually a fan of adult cartoons, but I haven't watched much of Bob's Burgers, but I did watch this one called The Great North. Yeah. And it was a similar vibe of this family. They're tight. They're all a bit silly. And it is definitely, like, meant for adults. It's not a kid's cartoon. But they love each other. And like you said, they go to bat for each other. And I love that. However, as I'm also thinking and reading this from an adult perspective now, I'm thinking about how deeply traumatizing it is for all of the children to be dealing with all of this stuff. Not only the world stuff and how traumatizing it is for everybody in the world, but also in their family to have their dad essentially retreating further and further away from them in the middle of all this chaos. Yeah. And then for mom to be distant, partly because she's assigned to something and is working, but also just because she's distant towards Dirk, and she's not distant towards her children. She still loves them and is really warm towards them. But the effect of their marriage breaking down through this, and the way that they treat, specifically the way that Mara treats Dirk, again, it's not her fault because she's under a spell. So she's not aware even that she's doing this, which is crazy. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily give an excuse, but it does give an explanation. And then to have the children, especially Elda, having to be that peacemaker between the two. I think I took that just a little bit too personally and was like, man, the trauma that would, in our world, reap on someone, and honestly on all of them, and the repercussions of that. I do think that was glossed over at the end quite a bit, that we just kind of ignored it, and then, you know, oh, we're all together, and it was a magic spell, and so everything's fine, we're all good.
The kids had to grow up a little too much while they were dealing with all of that.
It's just crazy. So I give it a 3, not again because my 3 ratings are just, these are nostalgic for me, but they're not, you know, they're not like,
they're not hitting.
There's some other ones that, you know, over time, Brianna and I will get to that are our favorite books and our favorite nostalgic books. So we'll get to that eventually. But Brianna, any other thoughts on this one? I know that we're actually going to be doing book 2 in a couple weeks, so we'll be able to talk more about these characters and the world. But any other thoughts on this particular book?
No, I can't think of anything else that I want to add. All right. This time.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Readers Clubhouse. If you like this discussion and you want to hear more, you can find us on YouTube and Spotify every other Friday. You can check the episode description for our social medias and join us in the Clubhouse next time as we discuss Book 2, the sequel / the one we read first, Year of the Griffin by Diana Wynne Jones. Bye-bye.
Bye.